I want you to picture a scene that plays out in almost every household eventually.
Oh, yeah.
It is usually bedtime, or maybe you are driving your kid to school, and it is just quiet. And then out of nowhere, this innocent little voice asks, hey, who created us?
It is the question every parent dreads. Not because it is bad, but because of what comes next.
Yeah, exactly. You give the standard answer. Depending on your beliefs, you might say God made us, or evolution, or, the Big Bang. And you think you are safe.
But you are never safe.
No, you aren't. Because then the child stares at you and asks the follow-up, the one that totally breaks the logic loop. They say, okay, but who created God?
Or what happened before the Big Bang?
Yeah. And that is the exact moment where most adults just hit a wall. We usually shut it down.
I do.
We say something like, well, that is enough questions for tonight, or nobody knows, go to sleep. We basically treat it like a glitch in the child's programming.
But the text we are diving into today argues that we are completely wrong to shut that down.
Yeah.
In fact, the author claims that if you silence that child, or if you tell yourself that the question is unanswerable and therefore a waste of time, you aren't just being practical. You are actively participating in what he calls a call to ignorance.
Which is a pretty heavy charge.
It really is.
We're looking at Defensive Metaphysics by Abdul-Jabbar Al-Waily. And to really wrap your head around why he is so defensive and honestly so passionate about this, you have to understand who he is fighting against in this text.
Right, because this isn't just a basic book about philosophy. It is a very direct counterattack against a specific way of viewing the world that has become incredibly dominant over the last century.
We're talking about logical positivism.
There you are, yeah.
Okay, so before we get into Al-Waily's defense, I want you to play the devil's advocate for me for a second. Because when I hear logical positivism, it sounds logical.
It
sounds like being rational. What is their actual argument?
It sounds totally rational, and that is exactly why it is so powerful today. The logical positivists, and this includes a lot of modern scientific thinkers, argue for something called the verification principle.
Okay.
Basically, they say a statement only has meaning if you can verify it with your own senses or through a measurable experiment.
So saying water boils at 100 degrees Celsius is a meaningful statement.
Correct. You can test it. You can see the bubbles. You can measure the heat.
Right.
But if you say God is the primary cause of the universe or the human soul is immortal, the positivist says, show me the data. Show me the instrument that actually measures the soul.
And since you obviously can't do that.
Since you can't, they don't just say, oh, we don't know yet. They say the statement itself is completely meaningless.
Wow.
They call it empty talk. It is like arguing over whether the number 7 is angry. It is just noise to them. So their whole stance is stop wasting time on metaphysics and just stick to what we can see, touch, and measure.
Which, to be fair, has given us a lot of modern technology. I mean, it is really hard to argue with the practical results of that mindset.
Oh, absolutely.
But Al-Waily isn't buying it.
Not even a little bit. He thinks that view is incredibly limiting.
Oh.
And he opens his argument with this beautiful analogy that really challenges this only what I can see mindset. He calls it the analogy of the closed house.
I really liked this visual when I was reading through the source, but I do want to push back on it a little as we go through it.
Sure.
So the setup for you listening is imagine a house that is total locked up. The windows are shuttered, the doors are bolted, we are standing outside, and we absolutely cannot see inside.
Right. We are the observers here, and the house represents the metaphysical reality, all the things that are hidden from our direct senses.
Right.
Now, the logical positivist stands next to us and says, well, we can't see inside. We have no cameras in there. Therefore, it is foolish to even guess what is in there. It might just be empty walls.
Mm.
So let's just talk about the garden instead.
Because the garden is visible, we can measure the garden.
Exactly. But Al-Waily says, wait, look closer at the house. Look at the outside walls. If the walls are damp and soggy and leaking, your reason actually tells you something.
It tells me there is water inside.
Right. But do you see the water?
No, I just see the damp wall.
But you know the water is there. You deduce the unseen cause from the seen effect.
Right.
And Al-Waily takes it even further. What if the walls are hot to the touch?
Well, then there is a fire inside.
Precisely. You do not need to see the flames to know the reality of the fire.
That makes sense.
So his point is that metaphysics isn't about just making up fairy tales. It is about looking at the damp walls of our universe, the order, the complexity, the sheer existence of life, and using our reason to deduce what must be happening inside the closed house.
Okay, but here is where I get stuck on this. Seeing a damp wall and guessing water is pretty safe. But isn't there a risk here?
What do you mean?
Well, if I see a damp wall, it could be a burst pipe, or it could be condensation. It could be that someone just sprayed the wall from the outside with a hose. If we allow this kind of deduction without ever seeing inside, don't we open the door to just making stuff up?
That is the risk, yes. And Al-Waeli fully acknowledges that philosophers have disagreed on what the dampness actually means for centuries.
Right.
But he argues that the alternative, which is refusing to even ask the question, is so much worse. He says that if you stop asking what is inside, you are denying a fundamental part of human nature. You're basically turning off your brain's ability to reason beyond the immediate moment.
And this is where he brings in John Dewey, right? Because Dewey felt very much like the final boss in this section of the deep dive.
In a way, yes. John Dewey was a massive figure in American philosophy. He was a pragmatist. And his argument is honestly very seductive to the modern ear.
Oh, for sure.
Dewey basically said, look at the world around us. We have poverty, we have disease, we have war. Why are we sitting in armchairs arguing about the essence of being?
It is the ultimate touchgrass argument. He is saying, let's fix the literal roads before we worry about some metaphysical destination.
Exactly. Dewey wanted to abandon metaphysics entirely. And epistemology, too, which is the study of how we know things. He wanted to focus all human intellect on social defects and practical problems.
And honestly, I kind of feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes when I hear philosophers talking in circles about abstract concepts, I do want to shake them and say, hey, the rent is too high right now. Can we focus on that instead?
It is a totally valid feeling to have.
Yeah.
But Al-Waeli's reaction to Dewey is just visceral. He actually calls this attitude an intellectual dictatorship.
Whoa. That seems a bit dramatic for a guy who just wants to fix social problems.
It sounds dramatic until you think about the implication. Al-Waeli says, sure, we need people to fix the roads. We absolutely need biologists and sociologists.
Right.
But to say that no one is allowed to think about the big questions, to declare that asking why are we here is a useless waste of time, he calls that a deep injustice to the human mind.
So he's saying we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can fix the roads and still wonder about the universe?
He goes further than that. He says we must. He points out that we have a division of labor in society. We have specialists for everything. Teeth, taxes, plumbing.
Yeah.
So why shouldn't we have specialists, meaning philosophers, whose entire job is to grapple with the unknown? Just because they haven't found the final answer yet doesn't mean the job itself is useless.
That concept of yet is really important here, because Al-Waeli does something in the text next that I really didn't expect.
The pivot to science.
Yes. He claims that science and metaphysics aren't actually enemies at all. In fact, he argues that the biggest scientific breakthroughs in history actually used metaphysical thinking.
This is, in my opinion, the absolute strongest part of his argument. It completely flips the script on the positivists.
Yeah.
He uses the examples of Einstein and the discovery of Pluto to prove that hard science is actually just successful metaphysics.
Let's break down that Einstein example. Because usually when I think of Einstein, I think of the ultimate scientist. I picture the math, the chalkboards, the verifiable proofs.
All right.
I don't picture a guy just guessing about what is inside a closed house.
But that is exactly what he was doing at first. Think about the historical context. Before Einstein, the observable fact was that light travels in straight lines. That is what we saw. That is what Isaac Newton said.
Right. That was the established science.
And Einstein couldn't physically see space-time curving. He couldn't measure it in a lab with the tools he had at the time.
But what did he do?
He sat down, he looked at the mathematical walls, and he realized they were damp. His pure reason told him that for the universe to make sense, mathematically, light must curve. Space must be spherical.
He deduced it.
He deduced it entirely in his mind using rational premises. He transcended his physical senses. For years, general relativity was basically just a metaphysical theory.
Because it hadn't been observed yet.
Exactly. It wasn't science in the strict positivist sense because it couldn't be verified.
Until the eclipse.
Right, the famous solar eclipse in 1919. That was the exact moment they could finally see the star shift position behind the sun, proving the light had actually curved.
Wow.
But Al-Waeli's point is this. If Einstein had listened to the positivists, if he had said, well, I can't see the curve, so it is meaningless empty talk to even discuss it, he never would have developed the theory in the first place.
So the actual science only happened because he was willing to do the metaphysics first.
Exactly. The physical observation was just the final confirmation of a truth he had already found through pure reason.
And then he uses the discovery of Pluto to back this up, which is even more of a detective story, honestly.
It really is a great story. Astronomers were observing Neptune, which was the furthest known planet at the time. But Neptune was acting weird. It was wobbling. It was dragging in its orbit.
The math didn't match what they were seeing.
Right.
So looking back at the closed house analogy for a second, Neptune is the wall, and that weird wobble is the damp spot.
Perfect way to put it. Now, the strict positivist looks through the telescope, sees nothing beyond Neptune, and says, well, I see nothing, therefore nothing exists. End of story.
But the astronomers didn't do that.
No, they used reason. They said the wall is damp, so there must be a cause. They calculated that there absolutely must be a ninth body with a specific mass located in a very specific spot, causing that gravitational drag.
So they discovered Pluto on paper.
On paper.
Before they ever actually saw it in the sky.
They found it with their minds first. When Clyde Tombaugh finally pointed the telescope at that exact spot years later and saw the tiny dot, he was really just confirming what the metaphysicians of astronomy had already deduced.
Okay, so if we buy this, if we accept that deduction beyond the senses is a valid way to find truth, how do we actually do it right? Because let's be real, we are not all Einstein.
Fair enough.
But Al-Waeli has this categorization of how we gather knowledge using insects of all things, which I found surprisingly helpful.
Yes, the ant, the spider, and the bee. It is a classic metaphor, actually. It originally comes from Francis Bacon, but Al-Waeli uses it perfectly here to diagnose where our thinking usually goes wrong.
Let's start with the ant. And I have to say, I feel like the ant is getting a bad rap in this text. Ants are incredibly hardworking.
They are very hardworking. But think about how an ant actually works. It finds a crumb, it picks it up, carries it back to the colony, and puts it in a pile.
Okay.
It doesn't change the crumb. It doesn't cook it or process it into something new. It just collects exactly what is there.
So in this analogy, the ant is the pure empiricist, the pure data collector.
Right. The ant represents the person who only memorizes raw facts.
Mm-hmm.
The wall is white. The temperature is 72 degrees. They build up this massive pile of data, but they have no real understanding of how it all connects. It is just a pile of crumbs. Al-Waeli calls this approach incomplete.
Then we have the spider. Now, spiders spin their webs entirely out of their own bodies.
Correct. The spider does not go out into the world and collect building materials. It sits in a dark corner and spins a beautiful geometric web entirely from its own internal substance.
So this is the rationalist.
Yes. This represents the person who relies only on their own mind and ignores physical reality. The philosopher who sits in an ivory tower and invents a massively complex theory about the world without ever looking out the window to see if it actually matches reality.
It is the guy looking at the closed house who completely ignores the damp wall and just decides there are dragons inside because dragons are cool.
Exactly. The web is internally consistent and it looks beautiful, but it is ultimately empty. It catches no real truth.
Which means we want to be the bee.
The bee is the absolute ideal for Al-Waeli. What does the bee do? It goes out into the physical world just like the ant, and it collects nectar. It touches the flowers. It deeply engages with reality.
But it doesn't just store the raw nectar in a pile.
No, it processes it. It takes that raw reality into its own body. It adds its own internal enzymes. It uses its internal system to transform that raw data into honey.
So in this metaphor, the honey is the truth.
The honey is true knowledge. Real knowledge requires both things. You need the raw data of the senses and the nectar, and you need the processing power of the mind. The metaphysics.
That makes a lot of sense.
Al-Waeli is arguing that the positivists are just ants. They are obsessed with collecting data, but they are terrified to process it. And the bad philosophers are spiders. They are obsessed with internal theory, but they ignore the raw data. He wants us to be bees.
This actually leads right into the big picture structure he draws near the end of the text. He calls philosophy the mother of all sciences.
He does.
Which honestly sounds a little arrogant at first glance, doesn't it? Like philosophy is just trying to take credit for everything the hard sciences do.
It does sound that way until you really look at the tree of science concept he describes. He views metaphysics as the root system of the tree of knowledge.
Okay.
The roots are underground. It is dark down there. You can't always see them clearly.
Cool.
But they are fundamentally what feeds the entire organism.
And the trunk and the branches are the physical sciences. Physics, chemistry, biology.
Yes. And the relationship between them is completely evolutionary. Think about it. 1,000 years ago, if you asked, what is physical matter actually made of, that was a purely philosophical question.
Right, because we had no microscopes.
Exactly. It was pure speculation. It was part of the root system.
Okay.
But eventually the bees worked on it. Thinkers deduced the concept of atoms using reason. Then over centuries, they built the physical tools to actually see and measure those atoms.
And once they could measure.
Once it could be tested and verified, it stopped being philosophy. It graduated. It literally became the science of physics.
So every hard science we have today is basically just a philosophical question that finally got an answer.
That is exactly the point. Al-Waeli says that when a big question is finally solved, it leaves the house of philosophy and sets up its own shop as a dedicated science.
That is a great way to put it.
But whatever's left over, whatever is still mysterious, whatever is too big or too deep to be measured right now, that remains securely in the realm of philosophy.
So if we follow the positivist advice and just chop off the roots, if we kill metaphysics entirely because it isn't currently useful or measurable,
then we are basically sterilizing our own future. We are stopping the exact process that creates new sciences.
that is a really profound warning.
It is. He says that if you tell that child to stop asking who created God, you aren't just being an annoyed parent. You are subtly telling the next generation of thinkers to stop looking into the dark entirely.
And if they stop looking into the dark,
They will never find the next Pluto. They will never formulate the next theory of relativity.
it really all comes back to that idea of human hunger that he mentions near the very end. He says humans are not just animals that are satisfied by fodder.
Now, this is really the ethical core of his entire defense. An animal is perfectly happy if it has food and shelter. The ant is totally happy with its pile of crumbs.
Right?
But human beings have a very specific gnawing hunger to understand the why of it all. We have a deep spiritual and intellectual need to know our origin and our ultimate purpose.
And telling us to just ignore that hunger because it can't be put on a spreadsheet is inherently dehumanizing.
He literally says it strips us of our dignity. To force a human being to only care about what is immediately useful or measurable is to reduce them to a machine.
Yeah.
For Al-Waeli, metaphysics is the defense of our humanity. It is the defense of our fundamental rights to wonder.
Even if we never actually get the final answer.
Even if we never get it, the dignity is in the attempt itself.
You know, that really changes how I think about that child's question in the car. Who created God? It isn't a logic glitch at all. It is the spark. It is the exact same spark that led Einstein to question Newton.
It is the human mind refusing to accept the closed house as the absolute limit of reality.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I am thinking about you listening to this right now. Most of us aren't theoretical astronomers or professional philosophers. We're just trying to get through the work week.
Right.
What is the practical takeaway for everyday life here? Is it just a reminder to be more curious?
I think it is much more specific than that. I think it is a direct challenge to look at your own ant tendencies. We live in a world of infinite data today. We are constantly drowning in crumbs.
Oh, absolutely.
We have more raw information at our fingertips than any generation in human history.
But maybe we have a lot less honey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have far less honey. We are so busy collecting facts and reading tweets and scanning headlines and memorizing statistics that we very rarely take the time to sit back and actually process any of it.
We don't ask what it means.
Right. We don't ask, how does this connect to the bigger picture of my life? Al-Waeli is inviting you to stop being just a data collector and start being a processor.
And also to not be afraid of the seemingly unanswerable questions.
Yes. Do not be ashamed if you catch yourself wondering about things you absolutely cannot prove. That isn't a weakness in your analytical thinking. That wonder is the actual engine of your thinking.
I really love that. And I want to leave everyone with a final thought that really struck me while we were reading through this text.
Let's hear it.
We talked heavily today about how the useless metaphysical guesses of the past eventually became the hard science of today. Things like atoms, gravity, orbital mechanics, they all started as basically ghosts in some philosopher's mind.
They did.
So look at the big questions that we call useless today. The things we argue about right now that seem to have absolutely no physical proof. Things like the true nature of consciousness, the actual fabric of time, the absolute origin of the universe.
The big mysteries.
Right. Which of these useless philosophical questions right now will just be the boring standard textbook science class of the year 2300? What are we blindly guessing at right now by looking at damp walls that our great-grandchildren will literally measure with a ruler?
And honestly, who is the child asking that exact question right now?
Exactly. When they ask it, don't tell them to hush. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.
Keep looking at those walls.